Good afternoon. I would like you to sit back just for a moment and think of the cold, crisp air of the Arctic blowing on your face. You could watch the polar bear and her cubs walk through the snow. Rushing by, you see a flock of penguins waddling to the ocean. What a wondrous sight that somebody can experience just by going to the Arctic. Now think of a calm stream flowing down a green, heavily forested terrain. You hear the birds singing in the distance, and if you're quiet enough, you won't startle the family of gorillas resting by the pond where the water is gathered. Suddenly you hear a raging noise coming from behind you. It's the sound of a chainsaw, followed by breaking branches and a loud thump. Good afternoon. My name is Russell Gerkitz, and I'd like to take the time to introduce to you the ongoing topic of global warming. Global warming effects on the planet are real. Our current lifestyle causes us to utilize the diminishing rainforests and consume fossil fuels. The human ways of life are having a great impact on the ever-changing planet. First off, let's define global warming. According to an article updated in April 2020 in the Encyclopedia Britannica, Michael Mann, an associate professor of Pennsylvania State, and Hedrick Sellen, an assistant professor from Boston University, defined global warming as the phenomenon of increasing average air temperatures near the surface of the Earth over the past 1 to 2 centuries. Now, the sun is the primary source of energy for Earth's climate system. When Earth emits the same amount of energy as it absorbs, its energy budget is in balance and the average temperature remains stable. When the Earth continues to absorb additional energies, the balance is disrupted. For the NRDC, the National Resource Defense Council, due to the ongoing pollutants such as CO2 and other greenhouse gases being trapped in the atmosphere, it is creating a barrier between Earth and space. These pollutants absorb sunlight and collect solar radiation that emits from the Earth's surface. Normally this energy would be emitted into space, but since it's being blocked, it's trapped, causing the planet to get hotter and hotter, also known as the greenhouse effect. I know we've all heard of it, but let's define it. Carbon dioxide. So per the Merriam-Webster Online Dictionary, it defines CO2 as a heavily colorless gas that is formed by burning fossil fuels and created when people and animals breathe out. CO2 is absorbed in the air by plants in a photosynthesis process, which means the more CO2 we create, the more plants we need to absorb this extra energy, as well as letting it escape through the atmosphere. Now that we have a better understanding of global warming and CO2, we can discuss some of the contributors of the CO2. It's given that animal life on the planet needs to breathe, and we exhale the CO2. Everybody does it. It happens all the time. It is also created by volcanoes, burning coal, gasoline, petroleum, and natural gas. Some contributors are natural and out of our control, but there are other factors that we can control. In an article published for NRDC, again, that's the National Resource Defense Council, in 2016 by Amanda McMillan, she goes on to tell us that we produce about 2 billion tons of CO2 every year in the United States alone just by burning fossil fuels for electricity. This is one of the largest sources of heat-trapping pollutants. Another main contributor is the transportation sector that generates 1.7 billion tons of CO2 emissions a year. Now, if we think about it, that's a total of an estimated 3.7 billion tons of extra CO2 produced in the United States alone that is being trapped in the atmosphere. After further research, I found a pie chart on climatecontrol.org that was uploaded on February 19, 2020. It confirms the transportation and electricity are in fact the highest contributors of greenhouse gases. This chart shows transportation, electricity, and industry are the three main contributors in the United States for CO2 emissions. With all the extra CO2 being created, you would think it would be a good idea to plant more trees. Again, the trees use the CO2 in the photosynthesis process that helps reduce the amount of CO2 that exists in the atmosphere. Well, unfortunately, we are doing the opposite. According to the rainforestinfo.org, they claim that some of the immediate causes of rainforest destruction are logging, fuel wood, mining industry, agriculture such as cash crops and cattle ranching, and much more. Here's a quick glance at some pictures found on the internet of rainforest destruction. According to Rainforest Trust, a conservation network that started in 1988, it states that when forests are cleaned an estimated 70,000 acres a day, the carbon will end up in the atmosphere causing rising temperatures, stronger storms, more severe droughts, and rising sea levels. But if we prevent deforestation, the carbon can remain safely in the forests. And I quote from their website, studies have shown that halting tropical deforestation and allowing for regrowth can mitigate up to 50% of the net global carbon emissions through 2050. They go on to state that the tropical rainforests are the lungs of the earth. I would also like to point out a few of the endangered animals of the rainforest. According to the UNHabitat.org, in an article posted in 2018, they list a few rare and exotic animals that are endangered, such as the gorillas and orangutan. Browsing the internet, you can find multiple species that are endangered just by human consumption of the rainforest. Let's look at the impacts of CO2 emissions that are having on our planet. Here's an example of Grinnell Glacier in Montana over the past 81 years. These photos are from the Glacier National Park archives taken by T.J. Hillman, Carl Key, Dan Fager, and Karen Holzer. The far left is a snapshot of the glacier in 1938. The next one over is taken in 1981. And then we have a photo that was taken in 1998. And finally, the last photo on the right was taken in 2006. We can clearly see within the range of time how much hotter the Earth has become just by observing the particular glacier history. The impacts of human activity has caused the ice to disappear. To give you a better perspective, here is a comparison from 1938 to 2019. The data reveals that glaciers in GNP have decreased between 9 to 90% of their largest area at the end of the Little Ice Age, around 1850. Without glaciers on certain areas of the Earth, we are also impacting the wildlife. For example, the polar bear. Remember earlier we imagined standing in the Arctic with the cold wind blowing on our face as the polar bear and the penguins passed by us. If we continue down this path, the polar bears may only be remembered in our history books. Polar bear hunting grounds are on top of the ice. Without the ice, they can't hunt. If they can't hunt, they cannot feed their cubs. In an article from Earth.org written on July 23, 2020 by Carol Conning, states that the study conducted by Nature Climate Change predicts most polar bears in the Arctic will be extinct by 2100. If change doesn't happen quickly by 2040, polar bears will experience reproductive failure. And I quote, polar bear numbers have already dropped 25 to 50% in Alaska's southwest Beaufort Sea population, and 30% since 1987 in western Hudson Bay, Canada. If we don't act fast, our children and grandchildren will never be able to see the animal alive in the wilderness. Now, let's have a look at the CO2 emissions during the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic. In an article published by Nature Communications on October 14, 2020, shows us the reduction of CO2 emissions during the pandemic compared to last year. We can see a great reduction in April and May of 2020. To give you a visual example of what the chart means, here's a photo taken by Liz Kimbrough in an article posted on Mongabay News showing how pollution has decreased in China during the COVID-19 pandemic. This gives an eye-opener of how bad the CO2 issues have become. By looking at the photo, we see just how bad the human impact has become on this planet. The changes will not happen overnight. A few things we could do to help reduce CO2 emissions are reduce fossil fuel consumption, protect our rainforest, use energy efficient utilities, converting to renewable energy sources. Well, that's all I have to say on this subject. I appreciate your attention. If you're still interested in the topic, I'll post a link in a short 3-minute and 39-second YouTube clip, a hashtag Nature Now message from Greta Thunberg. Thank you.